So last week, presciently, you wrote a piece in the Financial Times saying, time for business leaders to wake up. This morning, as you look at the headlines, have they woken up? And if so, why? Is this an economic issue?
I've been glad to see what many in the tech community have said. I think they've recognized that as global businesses, they've got a huge stake in the United States being a nation of the Statue of Liberty rather than being a nation of refugee camps and barbed wire. They've got a huge stake in the United States supporting an open, tolerant global system. They have that stake for their employees. They have it for their customers. They have it for the reputation of the United States, and they've spoken out. I've been gratified by what we've heard out of the tech sector. We've heard rather less so far out of the mainstream business community, and I'm going to be watching in particular the members of the advisory board that President Trump has appointed to help him make America great again, because this action's an important test of that. And we'll see whether they're going to go along with it or whether they're going to speak out. I think what John McCain and Lindsey Graham did is really a very good example of principled leadership. And at moments like this, everyone is tested about whether they speak out on what they believe or whether they decide to accommodate.
Right, Larry, but one, at least, leader of mainstream industry, Jeff Immelt, has spoken out. I've noted that we haven't heard from any of the domestic U.S. automakers, though, yet. To what extent are CEOs really, do you think, influenced by the threat of that Trump tweet?
I don't know. They can speak for themselves. I'm sure that most of them share the values of inclusion, the values of American tradition that were reflected in the statements that John McCain and Lindsey Graham made, the statements that Jeff Immelt made. And I don't know whether it's a sadder thing if others don't have those values, or whether it's a sadder thing if they're being intimidated by the prospect of a tweet. But it's an extraordinary thing, David, if business leaders in the United States are being intimidated by a president's threats of calling them out when the president's been in office for 1 week. That is an extraordinary change in what the United States is about. It's not all new. Richard Nixon had an enemies list. There are other instances historically, but if that's happening and it's working, it seems to me that every American ought to be deeply concerned. Whatever your views on particular questions about tax policy or trade policy, detaining people, detaining refugees, that's what we failed to do during the moments of the Holocaust are generally thought of as some of the most shameful moments in American history. And elevating that to high principle is, I think, deplorable. And the only thing worse, in a way, is if people are being intimidated from speaking out against it.
Yeah. Well, Larry, that's the business response. Let's talk about the response of market participants. You will know from watching a program like this, many of them who are long the market have this belief that we'll get this fiscal stimulus, these infrastructure plans, and this hope that we wouldn't get the stronger views of the president on things like immigration, on trade, become a reality once he got to the White House. As you woke up this morning and you looked at the markets, which were, to be fair, pretty stable, do you think market participants need to rethink that approach?
Oh, look, each market participant will have to make their own judgment. I am a bit fearful that what we're seeing in markets is a sugar high, That doesn't mean that they can't go higher. That doesn't mean it can't happen for quite a while. I'm the last person to claim to be able to time markets, but it does seem to me that there's a kind of euphoria that assumes that tax policy is going to pass fast. I suspect that's going to be very difficult. That confidence is going to remain strong. I'm not so sure with erratic actions like the ones that we saw, and that provocations to the world aren't going to be responded to. And I'm not sure that's a good bet either. So I am nervous that it's a kind of sugar high in markets. But again, that's not a judgment that can be a basis for near-term investing. What I think is a clear error is to confuse several months of strong markets with strong fundamentals. You know, the period post-election when markets did best in the 20th century was the period between Herbert Hoover's election and his inauguration. And of course, as a presidency, that was the biggest economic disaster that we had.
Well, Larry,
so
can I just pick you up
I don't
on
know
that
what's
point,
going to
because
happen
I think
next
it's really
in markets,
interesting.
but nobody should be serene
Your point
just
on
because
price.
markets are behaving well.
Your point on price, Larry, do you think price is setting the narrative?
Oh, you know, different people are responding to different narratives. For many, what's setting the narrative is, frankly, fear about what their country might become. Now, look, this might all get cleaned up. The new administrations always have growing pains. I think we're going to know a lot more a week from now when we see whether the administration recognizes that this was chaotic, costly, and counterproductive, or whether they decide to double down on this kind of thing and continue to make policy in this way. I think we'll know more a week from now, and that will either be cause for reassurance or cause for greater alarm. I mean, nobody should make the mistake of making a definitive judgment about an administration on the basis of what happens 1 week in.
Right.
At the same time, no one should make the mistake of not taking seriously what's happened over the last week.
So, Larry, I wanted to pick up on what you were saying versus the fundamentals versus the administration. If you strip out the administration for a second, some of the fundamentals are actually quite good. We're near full employment, as the Fed had said. Five-year break-evens are now over 2%. How do you factor that in if you're looking at the markets when you have a VIX that's trading under 12 versus the day-to-day headlines that can cause some uncertainty in the markets?
You know, again, that's something where every investor is going to have to make a judgment. I have to say that I am surprised by how low that VIX measure of volatility is, because it seems to me that whether you're optimistic or whether you're pessimistic about the new administration, you have to look at the last several weeks and think surprises are more likely than usual going forward. And in a period when surprises are more likely than usual, wouldn't have been what I expected that measures of volatility would be as low as they have been. On the other hand, markets have not been very volatile in the last month, and that's probably what is shaping the VIX. But I have a feeling that at some point, more normal volatility will take hold again.
So, Larry, all the focus right now is on these 7 countries, Muslim-majority countries. But last Friday, it was all on Mexico. And over the weekend, you had another tweet on that subject. I'm going to quote it here. If the goal were to bring a Hugo Chavez figure to power in Mexico, hard to find a better strategy than @real Donald Trump. That, of course, is the president's Twitter handle. So let's talk about Mexico. Is that overstating the case that there could be really destabilizing of Mexico if we are too tough on them?
I don't think so. 4 presidents, bipartisan, going back to the first President Bush, have worked very hard to bring Mexico, which was traditionally truculent, angry, opposed to the United States, into a sense of partnership with the United States. That's what President Clinton did in many ways. He called the financial support he provided Mexico in 1995 one of the major foreign policy accomplishments of his presidency. And this kind of thing has been done on a bipartisan basis, and rightly. We share a 2,000-mile border with a country with 90 million people. There's enormous amount of joint production that, just as companies in Japan have supply chains with companies in Thailand or Malaysia or Indonesia, so we have supply chains with a lower wage country like Mexico, and it makes our economy much stronger. So politically and economically, partnership with Mexico, it seems to me, is very much in our interest. And it seems to me that to disrespect Mexico, to threaten Mexico, to literally, not figuratively, literally seek to wall off Mexico is to put that at risk. And you just have to look at Mexican politics to know that there are very strong, very far left elements in Mexican politics that are quite strong and that will be emboldened when those who have sought to be partners of the United States are so firmly rebuffed. And it seems to me that with challenges of maintaining civil society, the challenges of lawlessness, the challenges of the drug trade in Mexico, the challenges of migration, the last thing we would want to do is rebuff those who want to be partners with us and embolden those who want to follow the Castro-Chavez tradition of Latin American politics. That's not to say that you can't discuss rules of origin in NAFTA. That's not to say that a 25-year-old treaty shouldn't be a subject of discussion. But the kind of approach that we've seen, I think, is very counterproductive, and you just have to read the Mexican press to see what kind of effect it's having.
So, Larry, let's pick up on that discussion point that you just made. Is it possible that 1 week into this new presidency, we are over-interpreting what's coming out of the White House? You've served close to the Oval Office. You've served in 2 different administrations. But this is a different sort of president. And when he says these things, maybe this is part of a negotiation. He's throwing things out there that may seem extreme as a way to backing into a better deal. Should we at least be open to that possibility?
Look, as I said, David, it's 1 week in, and all of us want the same kind of economic and civic and social success for the United States and for the global economy. And so no one wants to be rooting for failure, and everyone should be watching and adjusting their views as events unfold. I don't think the strategy of humiliation and provocation is likely to be successful in international negotiation. And I'm not aware of any previous instances in which this kind of strategy of humility and provocation has been effective in foreign policy. And certainly there have been many instances where it has set off highly charged reactions within countries that have then magnified hostilities as leaders on both sides couldn't afford to lose face. So the usual rule in international negotiation is that particularly when you're negotiating with democratic countries like Mexico, that were democracies, you need to negotiate in a way that will enable your negotiating partner to claim victory rather than to admit humiliation. And it seems to me that the approach we're taking is making that more difficult, not easier. But look, time will tell, and we will be able to reach judgments with the passage of time. But it seems to me that it's incumbent with a new administration on those who have concerns to express them so that they can be fully considered. And again, many of the business leaders who advise the new president have major business presences in NAFTA, and I hope they'll be heard from. Perhaps they see wisdom in this approach. I doubt it.
Well, Larry, I want to take a look at market reaction when it comes specifically to Mexico as well as the U.S. I mean, if you look at dollar Mexican peso, the peso was the best performing currency last week. You're seeing the peso continue to rise today. Do you feel like markets have insulated and divorced themselves then and taken the reality of Trump in stride going forward? And is that the right call?
I don't think so. I think you have to look at these things over more than a daily or weekly view. If you look at where the Mexican peso is today compared to where it was prior to the election, it's way down. And that, of course, makes it much more attractive for Mexicans to work in the United States relative to in Mexico, and so encourages migration. That, of course, makes Ohio much less competitive compared to Monterrey because of the labor cost advantage. So I think it's a mistake to try to read things into the daily movements. I'd much rather look at the larger and longer term movements, and there I think you'll find that the Mexican peso is quite depressed relative to where it was before the election.